So first things first, I'll introduce myself. Um, my name's Matthew Jones. Again, thank you so much for having me. I am a lecturer of academic writing at the University of Florida in the USA, where I teach advanced writing and where I will be doing some things with Wales in the future. So I hope to see you all there. A little bit of my background and sort of what got me here. And of course, I won't have to do this every time, but it's nice to get to know each other, surely. I got my PhD in English literature at the University of Connecticut. I got that in 2 years ago, but before that, I got a master's in Welsh and Celtic studies at Cardiff University, in Cardiff. And thus my connections. And since then, I have tried to become more involved with education. So here we are. And so this is just, again, the first slide, introduction to scholarly writing. You see, I really sort of pull out all the stops when it comes to fancy slides. I'd love to get to know you a little bit better if you have any questions. So here's my email address, matthewjones1@ufl.edu. So yeah, that's a 1. Incidentally, at Cardiff University, I was M. Jones like 102, but that's a totally different story. So again, today we're going to be talking about what scholarly writing is. And again, I use the word demystify, but I also want to sort of we're gonna sort of look at it in two ways. First, we'll talk a little bit about it as a form, right? So the fact that you will be writing 8, 9, 10, whatever length papers and what that writing actually looks like. But more to the point for my talk today, we're going to be looking at it a little bit more subjectively, right? So not just as a task that is imposed upon you in your classes, especially in humanities classes, but everywhere, but sort of as a way of sort of approaching and applying any sort of moment for debate or for better understanding in life itself, right? So the same principles by which you try to be persuasive in a meaningful way in real life are those that you apply also to your scholarly writing, right? So we're going to sort of look outside of the box just a little bit. And of course, the caveat is that, of course, in your classes, including the ones for the summer program, you'll have more specific tasks and things that you're asked to accomplish, right? So we're just sort of looking in sort of broader strokes at what makes scholarly writing scholarly, what makes it academic, what makes it compelling. All right, so with that, this is our itinerary for the day. Again, you can see it's very complex. So what we'll be covering, we'll talk a little bit about, again, what scholarly writing is. And then, these next two bullets, they look similar, but there's some subtleties, some nuanced differences between them. How do you do it? How do you actually do scholarly writing? How do you perform scholarship? How do you enact it? And then in the end, what does it look like? And again, both formally and then also the actual act of doing it. So today, I'm going to be doing a fair bit of talking, but hopefully it'll be of benefit to you for the next talks that I'll be doing. Will be a little bit more interactive, and I'll get to sort of talk with you a little bit more, and I look forward to that. But again, just to reiterate, please be in touch with any questions or just to tell me more about what you're interested in. I'd love to learn about it. Quick aside, I can't see the sort of lobby thing anymore. So if there's anybody waiting in the waiting room, I can't let them in. The door has been locked. So anyway, so let's go ahead and do that. So what exactly is scholarly writing? All right, and again, we know what it is. I assume that I was always rubbish at understanding the different school levels in the United Kingdom. I don't like sixth form or the other A levels. I really don't know. But in the equivalent of high school over here, I assume that you've written essays, again, of various lengths. So really, what's the difference between what you're sort of going to be starting to be expected to be doing in your sort of collegiate professional careers, and sort of beyond that, what's the difference between that and what the stakes were in, again, the equivalent of your high school essays. So you can think of scholarly writing in this sense as an opportunity to first say intelligent things about topics that are significant to you, right? And so notice that that's quite broad, right? This isn't say intelligent things about strictly whatever is assigned to you. It's an opportunity for you to talk about things that mean something to you. And again, I would encourage you, for the sake of our conversation today, to think a little bit outside of the box for that. So of course, the academic topics that you will be pursuing are significant to you, right? Or else you wouldn't devote your life to them. So that can be things in your literature classes, history classes, anthropology, science, whatever. But my suspicion is that there are other things that are significant to you also that you might find that other people who know less about them lack a certain understanding of, right? That can be your favorite sports team, that can be your favorite music, your favorite musician, your style, your fashion, your interests, right? So it's an opportunity to say intelligent things, to change people's ways of understanding and thinking about all of these topics, right? And again, so we'll focus on the form of writing, but the actual act of being persuasive sort of goes beyond that, right? So for that, just so again, this isn't just for your homework assignments, but for any opportunity to expand somebody's sort of radius of understanding about something that you know more about than they do. And with that in mind, it's an opportunity to speak to an audience that's willing to learn from you, right? So by virtue of your readers picking up the essay you wrote, or by virtue of being in the audience for a lecture that you're giving, you can, if people are waiting in the lobby, you can assume that they are willing to be persuaded by you, or to at least hear what you have to say, right? This isn't the same as, I assume that by this point of your lives, you've had arguments with people who do the equivalent of stick their fingers in their ears and are not going to hear anything of what you have to say. But that's not how this is. You're speaking to an audience that, is, again, willing to learn. And we'll talk about the differences in how you address your audience, or how you, like, what form persuasiveness takes. But you can sort of, make two broad assumptions. The first is that the audience, just knows far less than you do about whatever it is that you want to talk about. And again, this can be everything from Welsh language policy to, the Welsh national football team, whatever, the best thing to do on the weekends, whatever, right? So you can assume that they know less than you do and are earnest in wanting to learn more about it, or you can assume that they disagree with you, but are at least willing to hear you out, and perhaps, have their, again, radius of understanding a bit expanded by virtue of listening to you. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. It's an opportunity to take part in important conversations, and this part is important, and make contributions to our understanding of them. So it's a little bit more involved than just regurgitating facts, right? You're trying to put yourself in a position to add to a conversation, to sort of enhance how we appreciate something. Again, whether that is history, linguistics, whatever. Your job here is not simply to report on things as they were. So again, I only have my own high school experience for this, but for me in high school, a good grade on an essay tended to be based on reading comprehension. So can you read a book and then fill in the blanks, or get the multiple choice questions right? What did Hamlet do? Who's Yorick? All of these things, right? So that's reading comprehension. Did you actually read the book, and can you regurgitate what happens in it? You're doing something more than that now. You're going beyond that. Your audience assumes you've read the book. They assume that you're an authority. You are now putting yourself in a position, again, and we'll get back to this, to be the person that people refer to as an expert, right? Nobody got a 100 on a multiple choice test about Hamlet and then had anybody think they were an expert or a leading authority on it. They think they just read the book and have a capacity to remember details. So you're making contributions to our understandings of important things and things that are important to you. It's an opportunity to expand your own radius of knowledge on the subject and what informs it, both the subject and your radius of knowledge. It's an opportunity to talk to other, to sort of interact with other smart people, and be introduced to things that you didn't know about, that you didn't know were there, and that they did. So it's not just you with a microphone shouting at the world, but it's entering again, taking part in conversations with other smart people and sort of moving things forward in a sort of collaborative way overall. Not necessarily reinventing the wheel, not making a new sort of invention or discovery void of human contact, but actually entering into a community. And lastly, on this front, it's an opportunity to be the authority, like I said before, and to be the person who is quoted by other people, right? So like in scholarly writing, you want your reader to take away your ideas and say, I read this recent essay by, I can't see anybody's name, but, by Matthew Jones in this case. And, so they can quote me, right? So that's what you want. You want to actually become that authority and that person who is quoted. So that's what scholarly writing is, right? It's a little bit more, again, it's a little bit beyond just, a thesis statement and body paragraphs, but this is actually what the purpose of it is. Okay, and again, I want you to start thinking about things that are important to you. So I'm going to give you just a minute, and I can't see you, so I'm just going to trust that you do this. But I want you to take a minute. I want you to think about something that you're passionate about and that you believe others would benefit from knowing more about. All right, and I want you to think about something else too. I want you to think about the intellectual journey through which you've learned as much as you have on the topic. My guess is that you didn't just divine it out of the air right now, your expertise and your background knowledge on something, but you've accumulated knowledge that puts you in a position to think that you can inform other people about it. And I want you to think back on what that journey looked like. And again, I want you to, this doesn't have to be strictly academic, but it can be. Why should people be more supportive of Welsh language rights? Or, why is the Welsh, again, I keep going back to this, why is the Welsh football team better than the English one, even though they didn't beat them at the last Euros, right? Whatever you feel strongly about. And I want you to think about these two things. We'll get a chance to expand on them, but I just want you to think, why should other people know more about it? Why should they care? Why should somebody who doesn't speak Welsh care about the Welsh language, right? How you would go about teaching them, how would you go about making this feel more important to them? All right, so I just want you to take a minute and think about that. Write it down if you could, because again, we're gonna return to it, but go ahead and do that for me. All right, that's a minute. Again, I can't see anybody, but are there any? And but I think anybody could talk if they wanted to. Are there any brave souls who want to just share a brief in a few seconds, something that they are passionate about and believe others could benefit from knowing more about? I can't call on anybody, so if somebody just wants to shout something out, that'd be great.
I'd say that people ought to know a bit more about individual rights and their protections in constitutions. And my reason for that is it directly affects what they're allowed to do on a day-to-day basis.
That's perfect. That's great. And again, you probably know this. You might, it's surprising how little sometimes people do know. And then that leads to being taken advantage of. Great. Maybe one more. Anybody else? No, that's okay. We'll have more time. I assume that, everybody's microphone just broke at the same time. I hate when that happens. So great, but that's a great example. Personal rights and liberties, natural rights, civil rights. And so again, so I don't know what your name is or anything. I'm sorry. What is your name? Who?
Luke.
Luke, hi. So, Luke's choice, Luke's choice for this, so he might ask himself, how would I even go about introducing to people, the rights that they might not realize they have, or the rights that they need to have a better understanding of, right? Because the thing that happens is, as we accumulate more knowledge about something that's important to us, and we'll get back to this, we lose track of the fact that other people don't have that same background knowledge, right? So how do we actually start over and take on the role of being both the person who's making an argument and also the person who's instructing? Okay, and so that's what we're going to talk about now. We're going to talk about 3 elements of what academic writing is. We're going to talk about them each individually. We're going to talk about aims, materials, and methods. This is how do we do it, right? So this is the second part of that itinerary. And so for aims, so we'll get into questions of argumentation in my next talk, which I think is next week. But I want you to think back. Earlier I said, I put in those questions, how and why. But I want you to think about, what exactly are you trying to achieve, right? What do you want your reader to walk away actually taking, right? Do you want, presumably you want to do more than make them feel stupid for not knowing it already, right? Whatever it might be. What do you actually want what do you want to happen by virtue of you doing what you're doing? What position do you want to argue, right? We'll get back to this, but there always needs to be a position. This goes back to the fact that we're going beyond reading comprehension when we're going into actual argumentation. Scholarly writing goes beyond making an observation, right? It goes beyond just pointing to a problem and saying that it's there. And you actually you have to sort of propose something of a solution. And with that in mind, what issue or problem do you want to explore, right? So it needs to be more than just stating a fact. You need to sort of make the observation into an issue, right? Again, I'm sort of culturally out of the loop, right? But Wales lost to Denmark 4-0. That's not a scholarly point. That's not a debate. Who's going to argue against that? What would you do with 8 pages just repeating the fact that they lost? The issue is why, and sort of, preventing something like that in the future. So what is the issue? How do you problematize what it is that you want to talk about? And lastly, and this is the most important, what will the audience gain from you achieving the aims that you do? So think about what you're trying to accomplish as something of a ripple effect, right? Your reader or whomever will read the essay that you wrote or be in the room for the lecture that you deliver. And it doesn't end there, right? You're informing their way of thinking about this topic so that when they leave the room, when they leave the classroom, whatever, they will then go on in their lives informed by what you've taught them. So how do you actually want to influence the people who you have the attention of, and what will they gain from it, right? Again, so this is one of the reasons that, and we'll talk about this again more in argumentation, but this is one of the reasons why, you probably want to approach whatever your topic is with a little bit more tact, than simply just, calling your audience idiots for not knowing already these things that are important, right? Because with any luck, what they'll do is go on and tell other people about this thing that you think is important, right? And that is how we solve the problems, right? That's why if it was not that, then we could just talk to ourselves in the mirror, right? But we're actually trying to look outward and and sort of, again, informing our audience, who then will go and inform other audiences. And so materials. So we have our aims, we have what we're trying to achieve, and now we have our materials. What kind of information will you use to make the point you're trying to make, right? What examples and what evidence? So this, again, in a hypothetical situation, let's pretend you're having a heated debate with anybody, with somebody in your class or somebody in your dorm or your parents, your brother, your sister, whatever, right? Somebody in real life. And your stuff and they know their stuff, and one is trying to sort of move the needle in the other direction. Again, and it can be about anything. It can be about government policy. It can be about the best place, to go, I don't know, on Chippy Lane or something in Cardiff. So what happens if you back up your points with actual information and sources and evidence, and they back up theirs by saying, well, I just know that I'm right. You can take my word for it. How likely is that to be compelling? It's not. So what examples are you going to use? What are you going to bring from the world to demonstrate the fact that you're right about this, right? How are you going to go beyond it just being your word and show your audience, don't take my word for it, look at this. And with that in mind, how will you go beyond showing things to your audience, and how will you go and actually interpret the things that you show them? Okay. Things like statistics, any piece of information, whether it be statistics or an image or a quote from a book, it's sort of meaningless on its own. What gives it meaning is telling people how to understand it, right? So to give you an example, forgive my ignorance. I can't remember if Johnson & Johnson's vaccine was in the United Kingdom also. I know it was over here. So you have the Moderna and Pfizer, and they're like 98% effective or something wild like that. But, so just to take one example of going beyond showing things and actually interpreting them, if I just sort of put up an image that said Johnson & Johnson vaccine is 66% effective, by and large, people don't really know what to make of that, right? And I need to inflect it. I need to tell them what the words mean. And that can be as on the lower end, as easy as just adding a word to the sentence. Johnson & Johnson vaccine is only 66% effective, right? So that's inflecting how the reader understands it. They say it's only 66, right? Or it can be is incredibly effective at 66%, right? So notice that I'm assuming the role of the authority and telling people how to understand it. And that's when I then go on and bring in more information. It's incredibly effective at 66% compared to the fact that flu vaccines hover around 40%, right? I'm bringing in more evidence to help my readers who are in a position comparative ignorance to me better understand this thing that I know a little bit more about. Right. And again, you can apply that to anything. And again, one of my passions is the Welsh language. Right. So if you tell somebody, the Welsh is spoken by 25 roughly, used to be somewhere between 20 and 30% of people, that looks like a low number. But if somebody doesn't have a basis for comparison, then they don't have any idea. But then if you bring in the statistic that 200 years ago is spoken by like 90%, they get an understanding of what is happening, right? And then that's where you can sort of tell them, like, this is how you should understand this. This is why it's important. So moving on, we have our evidence and we have the fact that we have to interpret it for people. What does your audience need in order to better understand and be introduced to your claims? Again, assume they're in a position of ignorance compared to you. What did you need to know when you were first starting to learn about something in order to start to appreciate it, right? How can you sort of go back in time in your own intellectual journey and go right back to the training wheels, right back to the building blocks, and sort of convey them, right? You don't have to, assume that your readers are children or something like that, but how do you introduce them to the significance of what it is that you want to talk about? And then what forms do the materials take? The whole archive, the whole sort of world is open for interpretation here. So not just books that you're assigned, not just magazines or research journals or anything like that, but I think I hear some groovy tunes in the background, but I don't know who it is. Some statistics, videos. I can't tell what that is. There it is. I was enjoying it. But anyway, so we live in the world of social media. You can quote somebody's Instagram profile. You can quote their Facebook. You can bring in a photograph and say, this is why this is important. Could you imagine wanting to write an essay on fake news disseminated over Facebook, but then not quote any fake news on Facebook, right? You need, you can think outside of the box. So we have then that we are trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve, and we have a little bit of a sense now of the materials that we use to achieve it. And so lastly, for us at this very moment, we will return to these points during our discussion on argumentation. Is that so? How will you organize your ideas? What is your scope? And what is your sequencing?
Sorry, Matt, I'll just mute everyone and then unmute you. Oh, and then you can unmute yourself, okay? So here we go.
Yeah, sure, whatever you.
There we go.
All right, cool. No, it happens. It's not a big deal. We'll return to these points during our next discussion on argumentation. But the next thing you need to think about is how you will organize your ideas, and what your scope is, and then what your sequencing is. How will you sort of bring all of this information together in a digestible way for people? What will you leave in? What will you leave out? How will you direct people to what else is out there? How will you sort of, again, organize the ideas, bring them together? And then these are the big things, again, we'll return to them, but I want you to sort of bear them in mind, especially in terms of scholarly writing. What is your scope? What can you achieve within the parameters that you're given? If you're asked to write a 10-page essay, what can you do in 10 pages? The odds are that you can't do it all. If the world's ills could be solved with one 10-page essay, somebody would have written it by now. We wouldn't have to write any more of them. So what can you accomplish in that? How can you, again, inflect somebody's understanding just enough to get them to give them a desire to learn more? What can you do in a 30-minute talk? What can you do in a 10-minute conversation? So think about that. Think about what you can accomplish. Again, so thinking back to Luke's example on personal rights and liberties. Again, if I were to give you 10 pages to do that, people write whole books on these things. What can we do in 10 pages, right? Nobody's asking you to, again, reinvent the wheel or invent a longer lasting light bulb or whatever in 10 pages, but what can you do? And what is your sequencing? Why do you put things in the order that you do? There needs to be a rationale for that. So what's behind it? Why do you lead with one thing before going to the next, and how do you connect them? Again, we'll talk about that, but these are the methods that you want to think about. All right, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I want you to do one, and then we'll get into the breakout rooms, hopefully. But now I want you to, it can be the same topic from earlier, but I want you to take anything, again, something that means something to you, a topic, an event, a point, etc., that is important to you and that you think other people need to know about. And again, this could be anything. It can be the things that I've mentioned a handful of times now. It can be something from one of your other classes. It can be literally anything that is on your mind. But again, something that is important to you and that it should be a little bit more important to other people, again, in a position of comparative ignorance to you. So I want you to think about that. I want you to, if you were to try to change people's perceptions about it, what would be some of your aims, materials, and methods? So again, when I was in Wales and when I was learning Welsh, sometimes I would get some really sort of interesting reactions from people. Especially when I would go to other countries. Why would you learn Welsh, right? So that was something that was important to me, but was not important to them. So how would I go about explaining to somebody who doesn't know anything about it why this thing is important that they've never thought about? What would be some of my aims? What would I actually try to do? What are some of the materials? What kind of things would I draw their attention to, and how would I do it? Right. So I want you to think about those things: your aims, your materials, and your methods. And scholarly writing can be on anything, so you can choose anything for this exercise. So I want you to take, again, 5 minutes, write, type, whatever. And I want you to sort of talk about an idea that is significant to you. Again, for today, it can be easygoing. It can be highly academic, or it can again be, you know, who should take over for Gareth Bale when he retires. He'll never retire. But take 5 minutes, talk about that, talk about why it should be important and how you would make it important to other people and what you would do to do that. Okay? All right, 1 more minute. Thirty seconds. All right, cool. So hopefully you've written something down and you've started to sort of think about it a little bit. And so in a second here, I guess we're going to go over to Zoom, because the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is share your ideas with small groups of each other, hopefully for maybe 12 to 15 minutes. And I'm going to put you in groups of 3 or 4 to share your ideas. And I want you to do more than just listen to the ideas of the other person. I want you to sort of play the role of like the curious reader, right? Somebody who wants the other person to succeed, but also is giving them input on how to do so. What do they need to do to make the topic feel more important to you, right? Again, why should somebody who's not a fan of music, why should they care if all electronic music sounds the same, right? How can you try to sort of break that barrier? What kind of materials would help your project become more compelling to them? how can they navigate from making observations and into making claims, right? So that's what I want you to do as the audience. And notice that a new reader will have different things to say about the same idea, right? So again, unfortunately, we're not always going to be talking to people who just believe every word we say. So how can you sort of brace yourself and prepare for people who don't feel the same way that you do? So the way that we'll do that today is that since it's groups of more than 2, you'll have at least 2 other people giving input. My guess is that they aren't going to say word for word the exact same things. So already you're confronted with multiple responses and reactions to what your ideas are. So what are the implications of this? How do you account for? What do you do? Is this a good thing? Right? Is it a bad thing? Like, you know, how do you not get overwhelmed by the fact that everybody has a different opinion, right? So they're all complicated things, but they're things we have to start thinking about. So I guess now I'll try to go over to the Zoom room, and if you could, Matt, does that sound about right? And everybody can,
yeah,
I can break everybody up there.
I'll move over to Zoom as well, and
all right,
make you a host and one.
All right, cool. I'll see you all in a second then.